Meryl Streep. What if the greatest love story in Hollywood history was never meant to be told? Not a romance plastered across tabloid covers, not a scandal whispered on red carpets, but something far deeper, far quieter, and far more powerful than anything a screenwriter could have invented. For 40 years, one of the most celebrated women on the planet kept a secret tucked beneath her legendary composure. And now, at 76 years old, she's finally ready to let it breathe. This is the story of Meryl Streep, the woman they called the Ice Queen, and the bond she shared with Robert Redford that changed everything she believed about art, about life, and about what it means to truly be seen by another human being. But before we get there, let's go back to the beginning. Because you cannot understand the woman without understanding the fire that forged her. Mary Louise Streep was born in Summit, New Jersey, in 1949. From the very start, her mother whispered something into her ear that most children never get to hear, that she was capable of anything, absolutely anything, if she simply believed it and worked for it. Now most kids hear that and forget it by lunchtime. Meryl Streep heard it and built an entire empire out of it. She was a cheerleader. She was homecoming queen. She was everything the small-town playbook told a girl to be. But behind closed doors, she was doing something else entirely. At 12 years old, she was taking opera lessons. 4 years later, she quit. Not because she wasn't talented, she was extraordinary. She quit because she realized she was performing emotions she didn't actually feel. And that, right there, tells you everything you need to know about Meryl Streep. She decided, at 16 years old, that she would only ever do work that was rooted in truth. Everything else was just noise. The road from New Jersey to Hollywood was not paved in gold. At Yale School of Drama, she was waiting tables and typing other people's words just to afford tuition. She was doing dozens of plays a year until the exhaustion burned through her stomach lining and gave her ulcers. She almost walked away entirely, almost swapped the stage for law school. But the craft wouldn't release her. Something deep inside kept pulling her back. Then came New York. And with New York came the cold, brutal honesty of what the film industry actually thought of women who didn't fit the mold. During an audition for King Kong, the legendary producer Dino De Laurentiis looked at her and said, in Italian, assuming she wouldn't understand, that she was too ugly, that she shouldn't have been brought in. Most people would have crumbled. They would have grabbed their bag and quietly disappeared into the hallway. Meryl Streep responded to him. In Italian, she told him, calmly and directly, that she was sorry she wasn't beautiful enough for him, but that this was what he was getting. Now imagine the look on that man's face. That single moment defined her. Not just her career, her soul. But if one moment truly carved Meryl Streep into the artist the world would come to worship, it was the love and the loss of John Cazale. They met in 1976 during a stage production, and from the moment they found each other, they were inseparable. John Cazale was a magnetic, brilliant actor, one of those rare talents who could hold an entire room with a whisper. Meryl didn't just fall for him, she anchored herself to him. When he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, she didn't run. She didn't distance herself from the pain. She ran toward it. She took a role in The Deer Hunter specifically because it meant she could stay close to him during filming. She accepted a role in a television miniseries, not for the Emmy it would win her, though it did, but to earn the money to help pay his medical bills. She gave everything she had to keep him comfortable, to keep him loved. When John Cazale died, something in Meryl Streep transformed. The grief didn't break her. It deepened her. It gave her access to a register of human feeling that most performers never touch in their entire lives. And the world was about to discover exactly what that looked like on screen. By the time Kramer vs. Kramer came around in 1979, the industry already knew she was talented. What they didn't know yet was that she was also completely immovable when it came to the integrity of her work. Her co-star Dustin Hoffman was notoriously provocative on set, famously difficult, constantly pushing boundaries. At one point, he slapped her without warning to try to pull a raw reaction out of her. Meryl Streep didn't give him the meltdown he was looking for. Instead, she went to the writers and demanded they rewrite her character. She refused to play a woman with no soul, no reason, no humanity. She insisted the character deserved a believable inner life. She won her first Academy Award for that film. And then, in a move that perfectly captured who she was, she left the Oscars sitting on the back of a toilet in the ladies' room after her acceptance speech. Whether that was an accident or a statement, the image stuck. Awards were not her North Star. The work was. The 1980s belonged to Meryl Streep in a way that no decade has belonged to any other performer before or since. Critics were writing headlines calling her a once-in-a-generation force. They noted something eerie about her, a kind of inner electricity, a trembling beneath the surface that made everything she did feel dangerously real. She wasn't performing emotions, she was transmitting them. Then came 1982, Sophie's Choice. To play a Polish survivor of Auschwitz, she learned Polish. She learned German. She absorbed the history, the trauma, the weight of an entire people's suffering. But all of that preparation was just the scaffolding for one single scene, the choice scene, the moment where her character is forced to decide which of her children will live and which will be taken away. That scene was filmed once, just once. Meryl refused to repeat it. She said the pain was too real, too total, to ever manufacture a second time. The world watched that scene and went completely silent. Roger Ebert said it was the most natural and unaffected performance he had ever witnessed. She won her second Oscar. She followed that with Karen Silkwood, a real woman, a nuclear plant worker who blew the whistle on safety violations and died in a suspicious car crash before she could testify. Meryl didn't want to play a symbol. She wanted to excavate a human being. She hunted for every fragment of information about who Karen Silkwood actually was. Not the headline version, but the private version. The woman behind the myth. And then came Africa. In 1985, director Sidney Pollack was casting Out of Africa. His initial instinct was that Meryl Streep wasn't quite right. Not glamorous enough, not conventionally sexy enough for the role of Karen Blixen, the Danish writer who carved out a life on a Kenyan farm. He looked at other actresses. But then Meryl walked into the room, and Pollack later said there was simply nothing between her and the truth. No barrier, no performance. She was just there, completely present, completely real. He cast her on the spot. The shoot lasted 101 days in Kenya. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the scorching sun, the endless savanna, the physical demands of filming in an untamed landscape, something happened between Meryl Streep and Robert Redford that neither of them would speak about publicly for 40 years. Now, let's be clear. This wasn't a secret romance hidden from the world. This was something rarer and, in many ways, more profound. It was a recognition. It was two extraordinary artists looking at each other across a creative space and understanding, without a single word, that the other person got it. Got them. Got everything. Robert Redford was already a legend by the time they worked together. The golden-haired embodiment of American cool. The kind of man that entire generations built their fantasy lives around. But on that set in Kenya, Meryl Streep didn't see the movie star. She saw the craftsman. She saw a man who had no interest in outshining her, no ego screaming to dominate the scene. He simply stood opposite her and believed in her completely. And for a woman who had spent her entire career battling insecure men who saw her talent as a threat, that kind of quiet confidence was revolutionary. The scene where his character washes her hair became the emotional heartbeat of the entire film. Nothing about it was manufactured. The tenderness between them, the sense of absolute safety, the feeling that two people had slipped past all social performance and were just being, it was real. You cannot fake that kind of chemistry. You can only find it, and then protect it. Meryl has reflected on that connection with a kind of reverence that she reserves for very little else. She describes hours spent between takes in the tall African grass, not running lines, not discussing staging, but talking about what drives a human being, what makes a character's choices inevitable, what art is actually for. Robert Redford gave her something rare in that time: the experience of being a true creative equal, of having a partner who met her exactly where she was, without flinching. She calls him her lion in winter. She says she felt something she almost never felt on a film set: safe. She felt safe to go to the edge, knowing he would be there when she came back. The film won Best Picture. Their performances were called transcendent. And then the cameras stopped rolling, and life pulled them in different directions, and a 40-year silence settled over what they had shared in that African light. They crossed paths again in 2007, working together on the film Lions for Lambs. Critics were lukewarm about the film overall, but every reviewer who mentioned Meryl used the same words: natural, unforced, quietly powerful. She slipped back into their creative frequency like no time had passed at all. Meanwhile, the career kept going. It kept going in ways that defied every rule Hollywood had written about women over 40. The Devil Wears Prada in 2006 turned her into a pop culture phenomenon, her ice-cold fashion editor becoming one of the most quoted, imitated, and celebrated characters in modern cinema. Then, Mamma Mia arrived in 2008, and the world watched in pure delight as the most technically accomplished actress alive danced on a Greek pier and sang ABBA songs with complete, joyful abandon. $600 million at the box office. One critic captured it perfectly. The greatest actor in American film had finally become a movie star. She became Margaret Thatcher and won her third Oscar. She became Julia Child and filled every kitchen she appeared in with warmth. She joined Big Little Lies without reading a single page of the script. The first time in 5 decades she had made that kind of leap purely on trust. And right now, audiences are falling in love with her all over again, in Only Murders in the Building, while the world holds its breath for The Devil Wears Prada sequel and a biopic about the legendary Joni Mitchell. Through all of it, the Oscars, the global fame, the cultural iconography, she was also building a private life that most people never saw. For over 45 years, she and sculptor Don Gummer created something genuinely rare in Hollywood: a stable, grounded home. They raised 4 children together: Henry Wolfe, Mamie, Grace, and Louisa, all of whom have found their own paths in the arts, none of them overshadowed by their mother's colossal shadow. In 2023, a quiet truth surfaced. Meryl and Don had been living separately for several years. No drama, no public wound. Just 2 people navigating the honest complexity of a long life together, with the same dignity they had always carried. And now, at 76, Meryl Streep has done something she has never done before. She has opened the door, just slightly, just enough, to let us see the human being behind the legend. She has spoken about Robert Redford, not as a co-star, not as a professional memory, but as someone who genuinely changed her. Someone who showed her what creative partnership at its highest level could feel like. Someone who, in the tall grass of Kenya 40 years ago, made the Ice Queen feel completely, vulnerably, extraordinarily human. Robert Redford passed away in 2018. He left behind a body of work that will live forever, a legacy at Sundance that has launched hundreds of careers, and the memory of a man who built something generous with his fame rather than simply enjoying it. Meryl Streep knew all of that about him long before the obituaries were written. She saw it up close. She felt it, and she has carried it quietly in her chest for decades. She once said that every film is a new opportunity to say something honest. When you look at her life, really look at it, you realize that honesty has never just lived in her performances. It has lived in how she loved, how she grieved, how she fought, and how she chose to finally speak about the people who shaped her most. 21 Academy Award nominations. 32 Golden Globe nods. Every honor a nation can offer. And yet, the thing that seems to matter most to her now is not the gold on the shelf. It's the connection she had in a field in Africa with a man who saw exactly who she was and stayed right there. That is the silent frequency. That is the story she was always protecting. And now that she's shared it, even just a little, the world is a richer place for knowing it existed. If this story moved you the way it moved us, share it with someone who loves real storytelling. And if you want more of the truth behind the gold, the lives our greatest icons actually lived, make sure you're along for the journey. The best stories are always the ones they weren't supposed to tell.